Hello and good morning. How's everybody doing today? Wave at me if you're doing good. I hope all of you had an amazing fast day of DroidCon, and welcome to day 2. And in day 2, we'll be learning about Datastore. And before that, I will also be introducing myself. And let's start there. So my name is Madona Wambua. I am an Android engineer. I've been doing Android from 2014, and it actually started as a hobby. I built my first app for my kids, a simple math app. Before that, I was building inventory system as a Java developer. And I realized that I actually realized I could use that knowledge to build apps. And that's how I was like, wow, let me try to see if I can do this. So I Googled a lot, investigated a lot, and it worked out. I ended up building my first app for my kids. And then the app got a 4.5 rating with parents saying they loved the app. So to me, that was very amazing. So that made me get so much interested in apps. And like where you build an inventory system, nobody gets to send you feedback. I was able to see parents saying, wow, your app has helped my kids, and I love what you're doing. And that's how I ended up in Android and stayed. Now I'm an expert, and I enjoy building for Android. And yes, so today I decided to talk about the modern data persistent on Android, the Datastore. And I know many of us here already know about shared preferences. And what the Datastore is just an improvement of the shared preference. And we'll definitely have a Q&A at the end for anyone that has any questions. And I'm looking forward to that. Now, so what is Datastore? So as you can see there, I've defined what Datastore is, and that is a new and improved way to store data on Android. So it's designed to be more efficient and easier to use than a traditional data storage solution like shared preferences and SQLite. I know many of us don't use that anymore because we have room now. Now, so alongside my slides, I do talk about the advantages of using Datastore. And I know many people, when I gave this talk back in San Francisco, asked me what is the importance of even using Datastore when we have room. So I have those good examples as why you would want to use Datastore, and also why you would want to migrate to use Datastore if you're already using shared preferences, which is something that is always recommended. So if you've used SQLite way before, when Room came, I hope the feeling was mutual for many of us developers, you were very excited. That's how I felt. Because I looked at SQLite and I was like, wow, we have something new that's called Room, and I was so impressed. Now, so as you can see here, Datastore provides 2 types of storage. And that is preferences, which provides a simple key value store for small amounts of data, like user preferences and settings. And then also Proto. So I wanted to ask this question before I even continued. By the show of hands, how many of us here have heard about Proto? Oh, pretty cool, pretty cool. Nice, yeah. So Proto provides a more robust solution for complex data structures. And when I used to work for a company where we built an SDK, we used a lot of Proto, and I was so surprised. So back then, I didn't even know what it was, but then I took time to look into it, and I was like, wow, it makes sense to why we're using it. Now, so I did compile a slide where I just talk about the pros of using Datastore, just to convince anybody that's using shared preferences. And as you can see here, number 1, it has improved performance. So when you're using the modern Android architecture, it's optimized for performance. There's consistency. That means it provides consistency, which ensures the data is always in a valid state. There's also ease of use, which is it provides a simple API for reading and writing data, which makes it easier to use than traditional storage, like shared pref and SQLite. And then type safety, which I think is the most important part, which means that developers can catch errors at compile time instead of runtime. And then this reduces the likelihood of errors and improves the stability of the application. Now, so for us to walk through the Datastore, I'm going to be showing us simple code snippets of how you can actually implement this on your own app. So this is just an example. And we'll be looking through an example with, let's say, for instance, an app that I've built. So my example was actually from budgeting, but if many of you know me, I developed an app called Budgeting Buddy back in 2018 when I won that scholarship with Google. And I've been trying to improve that app as I learn, because it's really motivated me. Because it's one of the reason I even decided to start using Kotlin was I was very hesitant, but when I learned that I can actually just convert all the classes to Kotlin, from Java to Kotlin, it was easier. I started doing that, like converting through my Budgeting Buddy. And then it helped me learn a lot. So I use that app from time to time, like my dog fooding app, where I break it and make it. And because it's on production and people use it, it helps me know if I'm actually writing good code. So finding that pet app. Now, so first of all, as always, you definitely need the dependencies, and these are the dependencies that you will need. And as you can see, the version always changes, so make sure, please, you check the version that you'll be using. And then next, you'll need to create a new data store object, as you can see there. And you see the name there. The name parameter is a string that represents the name of the data store, just like the way you would create a room database and just name that is like the database name. Now, so here we define our 4 tasks. For instance, like I said, I was dealing with a task thing. So here we define 4 preferences key. That is the task title, the task description, the task priority, and task completed. So these keys are used to read and write data to the data store. So as you can see there, what I've just done is I take that object, task preference keys, and then I create those values. And then, as you can see there, the type is a string, and then I gave it like that's my task title, my description, my priority, which is actually an int, and a boolean. So I wanted to just use different data types so we can see how you can implement it using different data types. And then the next, so here, what we do now, we use the edit function to modify the preference data, and we then access the keys we defined earlier. So here, if you notice, there's a similar kind of like pattern with the shared preference where you edit. So here, as you can see, we're using this, we're calling that save task. And the task here is just the task here definitely is just the description, those particular data types that we're taking. I think it's 2 strings, 1 integer, and 1 boolean. And then here now is how we read the data. So we use the data function to retrieve the preference data and then access the keys we defined earlier. That is the task preference keys to retrieve the task data. And then we use the map to convert the preferences data to a flow task. And as you can see there, we defined the val task flow task, which we pass in pass in our object task, and then we say datastore.data and map to those. If you notice that, what we're doing there is just taking this, that there, and just passing it there to read the data from the data store. Now, how do we actually observe changes to the preference? So we will definitely need to call this. So we use the collect to observe changes to the task flow. And whenever the task data is updated, the Lambda expression is executed and with the updated value. So that's how you say, so here we've definitely updated this value. And as you can see there, once you get what you want from the task flow, you collect and then you do something. For instance, there is just updating what, let's say, a user has been inputting. And the reason as to why I pick the task is because I think this is something that can actually be stored locally instead of having to create, let's say, a Firebase app where you send all your data there. Because I feel like some data are well just stored locally from time to time so that you can access them even without any, let's say, bandwidth, which helps a lot. Now, let's look at products. So here we'll look at examples of products and how actually they compare with the previous preference. And I know many of us here have questions like, what is a product? What is a shared preference? What is room? What is this? You're confusing us. I definitely do have a slide for that, where I'll give examples of what each does and why each is important. Now, so here in Proto, so Proto, to me, to implement was a little bit tricky. So to be honest, I did struggle in the beginning because I didn't understand why we needed some parts, and you'll see that. But this is how you add the dependency. So you see there the data store version is similar to the previous one, and then you will definitely need to have the protobuf Java Lite, which is, when I was writing this, was 3.18.1. And then now you will need to create a file called .protofile. And this is going to be in your app source main, and then you'll create a directory called proto. And here we will define the task message that has 4 fields, which is our title, description, and priority. And this was pretty interesting to me, because when I was creating this, I wasn't able to access this particular field in my project, which was pretty tricky. And I realized there's actually an issue. There's an issue that's reported for M1s with Proto. There's an issue with that. So I had to use my older laptop for it to work. So that was pretty interesting. So this is how you're going to create, let's say, the task. And you call it a message there. And then after we configure the protobuf plugins to generate the code from the proto file, we will definitely need to put this code in our build.gradle. So in the documentation, it also gives you like steps and guidelines to how you can add that. As you can see there, you need that artifact. You also need the Java Lite, and also you need to declare that you're generating proto tasks, which is the tasks that we're going to create, and so that you can be able to access them. And then, so here in this slide now, it's where it gets trickier. It's not very different. It's pretty similar. But here we create a data store with a name task and a serializer that uses the task adapter to serialize and deserialize the task message. So as you can see there, there's more steps to the proto as compared to the previous one, the preference. So here definitely, that's how I was able to, let's say, read from and write to the product file. Now, how do we write to the data store? So here now, this one now becomes easier. We just use the update data. Here we first write that particular function, save tasks. And as you can see, we just input in our tasks. And then we update the data function to modify the task data. We use the builder pattern to set the task data and then called the build there. As you can see there, what we've just done is set the title to task.title, set the description to that, and set the priority, and then you build that. And then to read the data from the data store, we will now use, it's kind of like similar to the previous one, and I hope I'm not losing anybody here. It's previous to the way we just do the preference, but more steps in building the proto. But as you can see here, we use the task flow, and then we define that, and then we map again, and then take our object task, and then we set those particular, we say description is a set into title, and then set into description, and then the priority. And then finally, we do what we did to the previous one, which is definitely after all this, what we want to do with this data. And definitely we will need to display that data, so we collect it in our flow. Now, this is where I don't want to make sure I'm not losing everyone. So I added this to kind of like look at simple examples. And as you can see there, the shared preference, as you can see the axes, there's so many on the shared preference, but when we come to preference data store and proto data stores, so preference and proto, they're both data stores. And as you can see there, there's a couple of examples of how the differences, for instance. And as you can see there, it says in shared preferences, there's no save to call on UI thread, while on preference data, you can actually work is moved to dispatcher.io under the hood. And then also in the proto, you can see those advantages there. And as you can see in the shared preference there, can signal error, you can't know that, but in the preference and the proto data store, all those are shown in there. So that's the differences, and this is the important slide where you know the differences, because I know that can get very confusing. Now, I know all of us here are just wondering now, then why or when should you use preference data store? And to me, I would say, so if you have the both, right, proto and preference, when can I use them? So here you can see I created a slide just to show when you can use them. And I think the biggest advantage is that you should use preference data store when you need to store simple key pairs and small pieces of data. And these do not require any complex, querying or relational data storage. And then preference data store is a good choice for storing, let's say, user preferences, app settings, and other small amount of data. So nothing complex, just simple data that you will definitely need to store. But on the other hand, you should use Proto Data Store when you need to store structured data with complex relationship, and when you want to take advantage of features like, let's say, versioning, schema evolution, and type safety. Because Proto Data Store is a good choice for storing just data that requires more robust and flexible storage solution. And I know with that slide, many of us will be like, wow, so when should you actually even use Room? Because now we have all these types of data stores, but when do you decide, like, should I use Room here? So again, like I mentioned, Preference Data Store is just a simple lightweight storage solution for storing simple key value pairs, such as, let's say, preferences, settings, and other small pieces of data. Okay, it's also designed to last fast, efficient, and easy to use. And you can definitely see Preference Data Store is ideal for storing data that does not require, again, complex querying. But with Room, you need Room for a more robust storage solution. And that is because all of us here, I'd like to just ask this question to begin with. How many of us here use Room in their application? Everybody, yes. How many of us here have used shared preferences or have tried to use it? Also a lot of us. So I think most of us, then it means you know when you would definitely use this Room and shared preference. But for those who don't know, definitely it's because definitely for shared preferences or preference data store or Proto, just the small amount of data that you need to store. And I will have definitely a simple example later to show. And I know this is a big slide. So I wanted to definitely just have this here for people that like to read, because I felt like this is important just to give what is the purpose of using data. So if you have Room, and that's it. Type safety and compile time error. And as you can see there, Room database uses classes to represent entities and perform compile time checks on the SQL queries. And then you have complex data relationships. And then here also you can have migration and schema management, observability, and live data support. So there's many advantages of using that. Now, we've talked about what is preference data store, what is Proto. Now let's look at how can you actually migrate from shared preference to start using the latest preference data store. And I know this is going to be just an example, but there are steps that can actually help or guide you when you're trying to migrate to definitely achieve something. Because I know most of us, our apps are very different. So I always try to ensure that something is more reasonable. But I know apps definitely would differ. So definitely, again, you would need to make sure that you're using the preference dependency. Make sure that's updated. And then let me see there. And then in your code, you have to create a data store object using, let's say, the create data store. And the name parameter just specifies the name of the data store. And then you will need to replace your shared preference code with the equivalent data store code. For example, to read a Boolean value from a shared preference, you might have to use, let's say, a code like this here. Let me showcase that. That one there. So as you've seen, so you need to replace your shared preference code with the equivalent shared preference value. For example, there you can read a Boolean value from a shared preference by doing that. So val is enable equals preference dot get Boolean, and then is enable, and then pass the false value. Now, as you can see there, you definitely need to replace your shared preference code And you see that there, I'm just explaining here, we use the data property of the data store object to get a flow of the preference object. Then we use the map function to convert the preference object to a Boolean value. And let me see. So to write to the data store, definitely it's pretty straightforward again. Just the previous steps once you've done the migration. And here we use the edit function of the data store object to get a preference.editor object, which we use to modify the preferences object. And then you see there we use the Boolean preference key function to get the preference.key Boolean, and then the object corresponding to the is enabled. And we set it valued now to the parameter is equals to enabled. And then, in summary, preference data store is a lightweight and efficient storage solution for simple key value pairs and small amount of data. And while Proto Data Store is a more robust and flexible storage solution for structured data with complex relationship. And like I mentioned before, I feel like if I go back now into the app that I used to work on, where we used Proto, which I think was generated in, I think our platform team did build that, because we would definitely just pull that data because we were building an SDK. And I think I've mentioned this before, but to me, I feel like I should have asked I think he was the principal engineer, why they decided to go with Proto. Because I think later now, when I look at it, it didn't make sense, because we didn't need to store a lot of data. Just definitely, if a user has maybe clicked, just storing that data for maybe our analytics. But I feel like definitely you can utilize a lot when you're trying to build, when you're trying to get those settings especially. It makes a total sense to have the protos. And also, to be fair, I feel like you can also use the preference to kind of like just save. I think most of us here definitely use them to save, what are they called? Like just the values where you're logged in, like a username, and definitely not. I think, let me see. Would you use a password? How many of us here save their password in Datastore? How many? By show of hands. No one? Yeah. Because I think definitely that wouldn't make sense. But I think, so in summary again, that's just what you do. The preference data store is a lightweight and efficient storage for simple key value pairs, a small amount of data. While you can also use Room for, let's say, a project. For instance, my project budgeting buddy, I use Room because there's so many parts that are connecting to each other, and it makes sense for me to use that kind of that kind of storage. And then you can find all the resources here. I did have a couple of resources if you want to implement, let's say, Proto, if you want to play around with how you can migrate that documentation too, on how you can migrate from shared preferences to start using, let's say, the preference data store. And also, if you have any questions on how you can actually even use Proto. As I said in the beginning, I feel like Proto was so much to learn, and I was like, wow, do I even understand what Proto is? But I started digging into it, and I saw the advantage of why we use it in an SDK, for instance, because we've not used it in my work, even where I am right now, we've not used that. But we do use Datastore for other parts of the data. And then finally, I tried to talk about that too on my book, which is coming out tomorrow. I'm so excited about that. And thank you. So again, Android moves very fast, so it was pretty interesting for me to know that most of the links that I was also doing when I was doing my investigation and research, most of them were broken. I was like, wait, Google, you moved the code? So I had to go back there and edit again. And you can connect with me there. And that's it. Are we on time? Cool.